Yeah, I mean, I really first got interested in the sort of issues of colonial history and language when I first came to study in Taiwan. I mean, because I studied first in Japan for 2 years, where I was learning Japanese, and there I was just, a foreign student from America learning Japanese in Japan, and there was nothing particularly odd about that. But then I went to Taiwan, or about 2 years. No, it was 1 year after I left Japan to go home. I went to Taiwan, where I had already been in Japan for 2 years. So what Japanese influence there is here really jumped out at me very strongly. I mean, the Japanese words, the bits of culture, well, influence. I mean, certainly the architecture. I mean, all of the old Japanese buildings you see around, and again, not to mention the fact that I was on a Japanese university campus. In fact, it's really fascinating. Taiwan University, National Taiwan University, was originally one of the Japanese imperial universities. And Kyoto University, where I am now, also was, but I think you actually have a stronger architectural sense of an old Japanese imperial university at Taiwan University. They've got more and better preserved old Japanese buildings than Kyoto University does, which is really quite fascinating. One of the historical figures that I'm looking at for the Taiwan side is a Taiwanese political activist from the period named Tsai Pei-ho. There's his photograph. There's probably a bigger one inside somewhere. But anyway, he was one of the people involved in the sort of the movement to establish a sort of Taiwanese parliament within the Japanese Empire, and to have equal rights for the Taiwanese. And so back in the 20s and the 30s, he was involved in a movement to start teaching Taiwanese in public schools. And he actually applied for permission with the Japanese colonial government for permission to teach Taiwanese in school. Originally, he wanted to use the Romanized system. I don't know if you can get that in there, which is based on the system that was developed by missionaries in the 19th century. This is the Taiwanese language, not Mandarin, rendered phonetically in a Roman script. And then when that was rejected by the Japanese, then he tried to do a system that was based on the Japanese katakana script, which is actually not in this book like I thought it was. And then that was rejected again, because the Japanese had no interest at all in teaching the Taiwanese language in schools. They only wanted to promote Japanese, as that was, widely considered to be the main tool of integrating the Taiwanese into a Japanese identity and an identity as Japanese imperial subjects. And one thing that's very interesting is he, unlike a lot of the sort of Taiwanese elite that was well educated in Japanese, that were suppressed by the KMT in the post-war period, he actually went to Shanghai after the war, where he joined the KMT, and then he came back to Taiwan as a KMT member. So he actually was sort of in the government in the post-war period, and he actually tried to continue his same sort of pro-Taiwan agenda, pro-Taiwanese education agenda, and actually he even tried to get the KMT government to allow the teaching of Taiwanese, except that whereas in the Japanese period he'd first used a Romanized script and then a script based on the Japanese katakana, he tried to implement education of the Taiwanese language using a script that was based on the bopomofo, the Juin characters that were officially used for the teaching of Mandarin at the time. And here you can see an example of that, where it shows some Taiwanese written in bopomo. And it wasn't until, I guess around 1990, I forget the exact year, when the martial law was ended, that Taiwanese was finally taught in public schools in Taiwan. And I was in Taiwan for about a year studying Chinese, just in the Mandarin schools at Taiwan Normal University, National Taiwan Normal University, and at National Taiwan University. And both of those schools actually were originally constructed as Japanese colonial schools. specifically for colonial purposes. I mean, NU, National Taiwan Normal University, Shida, was constructed to help train the huge numbers of teachers that were needed to propagate the Japanese language and culture throughout the primary schools in Taiwan. And National Taiwan University had kind of a dual purpose: to give complete education, that is, education in any subject, to the Japanese living in Taiwan, and also to educate the Taiwanese in the subjects that that the colonial authorities thought they should know to help. But actually, a lot of the departments in National Taiwan University were originally not open to ethnic Taiwanese. So they couldn't study more sort of controversial subjects, the subjects that were considered to lead to, I guess, feelings of rebellion, political movements, like political science and things like that. But the wealthier Taiwanese, or those who got sponsorship, could actually go to Japan and then study anything they wanted to. So quite a lot of maybe even the vast majority of the really serious political activists in the colonial period in Taiwan had actually been educated in Japan at Japanese universities, where they were exposed to sort of larger swath of more liberal ideas that they then took back to their home region. And this is the same kind of thing that I think you see working in a lot of colonies. Like, for example, in the Philippines in the 19th century, the revolution was largely led by this educated elite who had gone to study in Spain, which had been the colonial master of the Philippines before the Spanish-American War. And yeah, the same thing in a lot of other places. So as for the influence today, I mean, a lot of the Japanese influence on education here, most of the direct influence, for example, Lee Teng-hui, the first democratically elected president of Taiwan, was extremely pro-Japan. He'd been educated while Taiwan was a Japanese colony in Japanese. He's a native speaker of Japanese, and he even studied briefly at Kyoto University, which is where I'm studying now, in the College of Agriculture, before eventually working his way up through the KMT government. Actually, he started through the sort of agricultural track before going on to higher level policies. So I think you'd say that the fact that he had this Japanese education certainly shaped his notion of what it meant to be Taiwanese. And the same is true to a large degree. I mean, being a Japanese colony for 50 years gave Taiwan a sort of distinct identity that is distinct from both China proper, which is what the KMT kept telling Taiwan it was, just part of China, for all of the decades that they controlled the island, and also a very distinct identity from the Japanese, while the period that it was part of the Japanese Empire, where they were both legally and ethnically and culturally separate from Japan. So being a single colonial unit of Taiwan under Japan was essential in shaping the idea of what it meant to be Taiwanese, and was really essential in developing the nationalist movement and the independence movement in the post-war period.